we're here today with a training for the co-chairs um, of the three committees, Platform Rules and Resolutions, for the 2023 Oahu County Convention. And we have with us parliamentarian Dr. William Puette, who's going to be presenting a brief overview of how it is to run a committee meeting with Robert's Rules of Order. And afterwards, we'll have questions by the co-chairs for Dr. Puette. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Puette.
Mahalo, aloha mai kako, everyone. And I'm now sharing my screen with the PowerPoints I'll be using. So I like to start with these are screen captures, obviously, from the Oahu County Democrats front page, right? Which throughout the time period to convention will be periodically amended and added to as new things become available, right? But I thought it was a good idea to start with this because this is where I'm going to be posting things. I'm also the webmaster for this public site for Oahu County Democrats. And every time there's a convention, I use the same basic format for posting things that are of importance. Certainly the notice of the date of the convention and bylaw requirements about what the convention format and so forth, as well as content will be. And then as you see there on the second half there, you'll start to see links to the important documents for the convention as they become available, right? So later on, we'll be adding the committee reports, etc., as we go along. Okay, but for right now, you can see what's there. And what I'm trying to say from this is please check the site. All right, not just the calendar, but this site. We'll put stuff up on the calendar, usually that is open to the public. Right? And so as you go along, we'll have to figure a way that you will be able, as committee chairs, to tell your committee members, voting members, what site they need or what URL, etc., meeting ID and Zoom they need to use to participate. But on the website, mostly we'll be putting the stuff for anybody who wants to call in, right, who's a guest and is not necessarily a voting member, because it's difficult to confuse those two and put them both up. You'll have people just, signing in willy-nilly this way or that. So this is an important site, and as your committee reports particularly become available, they will be posted here. So that being the case, my goal today is to primarily, because the questions come up, is how, as a committee chair or co-chair, do I deal with these committee meetings? And so keep in mind there are different documents and they have a priority, and they precedence over each other. So certainly the rules and bylaws, or the constitutional bylaws of the Democratic Party, our state, have the highest order of authority. And then, but mostly because this is a county convention, we're going to be looking at the Oahu County bylaws, which are on the website also. And you can, click on that. And particularly section 12 has materials about the convention. Now, these things that are in the county bylaws cannot be suspended. Right? And they are going to supersede anything in the standing rules for the convention. Right? So, and by the way, standing rules for the convention, as well as these other documents, such as the bylaws and constitution of the party and of the county, they are going to supersede anything in Robert's rules. So where there's a conflict between Robert's rules and the bylaws of the Oahu County, or the constitution and bylaws of the state party, we have to go in that order. And Robert's rules is like a safety net at the bottom. What about when it's not covered specifically? And so the term used in Roberts often is where the bylaws are silent. but not only where the bylaws are silent, but where the adopted standing rules, because the bylaws give authority for the Oahu County Committee to adopt the rules for convention. And you always want to have that done before. There are some conventions where they adopt their standing rules at convention, and I've always advised that this is a huge mistake because you could end up wasting the entire day of convention arguing about the rules. And so, and you try to keep the rules as stable as possible from year to year and deal with things that have changed. So the two documents that we'll be drawing on today primarily will be the standing rules. And again, Roberts clearly says that committees cannot adopt their own rules. So the only way that committees can have rules is if they are, and it's as provided in the bylaws for the county, if they are adopted by Oahu County Committee for use at convention. So on March 4th, the Oahu County Committee duly adopted two sets of rules, right? One for the overall convention, standing rules, and one specifically for committees, right? And so this is a lot of what you need to know, and I'm trying to answer today, is going to be contained in that document, which you see, described here as the committee selection procedures and meeting rules, right? And they're very important for you to read through, understand, study, have a really good grip on before you do your committee meetings. Of course, everything I can say about that, but in particular, the committee selection procedures and meeting rules. All right, so I'm going to start going through these, and okay, let's see if I can do this a little bit better. So I'm going to look first at sign-in protocols, and if you have your rules for the committees, you could refer to them as we go through here, and you may want to make a little check or highlight it or something. But I try to pull out, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. We don't have enough time to do that, and you would all be asleep by the time we this is a lot of this stuff. But there are really important things that I want to highlight. So in Rule 2.24, right, we have the sign-in protocols. So voting convention committee members must sign into the Zoom meeting with their legal first and last name. So, and this you really have to monitor and make sure happens as committee chairs. You don't want people signing in with some sort of funny code name, like Starbuster or something like that. And some people do that. So it's automatic. As soon as they get into a meeting, it defaults. And so that has to be changed. And the host has the ability to change that. You rename them. You can actually encourage people to rename themselves, as this rule says they're supposed to do on their own. But if they don't, then as chair, you have to handle this. Okay. So phone number is, again, not acceptable. People will be calling in by phone, but when they're in the meeting, that has to be translated to first and last name, real name, okay, and not some sort of alias or fictional identity. So if they are a voting member, then they're supposed to have at the beginning of their name in capitals VM for voting member, so that at any time when you're looking at the participants window, you'll know who the people are who are voting members and who, which usually will have a little phone icon, are not. All right. Although they'll have the phone icon, we still want their names, and you'll need to record them. All right, in the for your report later on. So instructions for doing so. Doing this will be provided by the committee's presiding officer. And the other thing about the rules is that Roberts really clearly, by the way, and I've had many discussions with Democrats about this, because Democrats favor co-chairs. And Roberts does not. Roberts not only does not favor co-chairs, he really strongly advises against the use of co-chairs, because there can only be one presiding officer. So in lieu of that, and the fact that you do have co-chairs, and the bylaws even say so, nevertheless, one of the co-chairs will have to be designated the presiding officer. Only one. Only one. You can't have two presiding officers. right? So the presiding officer has certain tasks, and the other co-chair can be given other tasks, such as, changing people's names and, assisting, so that one person is not trying to do it all. But the idea of making sure that one of the co-chairs is designated presiding officer, right, then is very important, so that you don't confuse who will have to, if a question comes up, who will rule. The only person who can rule on any issue of order is the presiding officer, and only one person can rule. So you must figure that out in advance, which of you will be the presiding officer. Okay, so then what do we say here? Only those on the list will have the designation of VM, because again, their voting members are appointed by Lorna, by the county chairperson. And you need a list of those people before we can really get these committee meetings going, which I'm sure is going to be forthcoming. Voting committee members who call in will have to somehow or another have their attendance, and that should only be as a last resort if for some reason they can't get on by Zoom. You really want to try to have all your voting members on Zoom in the same way that all of you folks are on this call or on this Zoom meeting right now, so that you can identify them, and their name should say voting member on it. And if it comes to voting on an issue before the committee, it'll be a lot easier for you to do that if they are properly labeled, and only those people should have the right to vote. All right. Okay. Guests can sign in via the meeting's call-in number, and that's what will be posted on the public website. Their attendance, name, and so forth will be recorded by the scribe. So you need to have one person who's a scribe. Now, the other co-chair could be the scribe, or you could just get somebody who's good at this and let them be the scribe, right? But you'll need to have somebody taking notes and writing things down, so that when it comes time to do the report, you've got what you need. And having more than one person in charge of that's also a bad idea. So assign a scribe, whoever that might be. Okay, the designated presiding officer, this is 2.2.1, so now we're sort of backtracking here. One of the appointed committee co-chairs, so it shouldn't really be somebody else, of each convention committee shall notify committee members at least 5 days in advance of the first committee meeting. If extended meetings are necessary to complete the work of the committee, such meetings will be at the call of the committee's presiding officer. Meeting notifications will include the date and time for the meeting and the Zoom link. And you should let me know as webmaster, so that I can put the call-in information, etc., and put it on the calendar. Voting members will access the respective committee meetings via the OCC on a Zoom account, and with a computer or other internet-enabled device using the login or URL provided, okay, ID and password. Except for the parliamentarian, access by non-voting attendees will be limited to sign in via the meeting's call-in number. All right, that's why we have to separate those two out. And I'm not going to actually be at a huge number, if any, of the committee meetings, but at least if necessary, I have that ability in this rule. Prior to the meeting on which a proposal is to be considered or other action by the committees, the meeting date, time, and location will be posted on the OCD website. Right? And I always try to make sure people understand, especially committee chairs, there's a difference between the letters OCC and the letters OCD. And whatever you might be thinking about OCD, it's not the compulsive disorder. It's the name of the group is the Oahu County Democrats. But there is the Oahu County Committee, which is like the governing board of the Oahu County Democrats. And this is a convention of the Oahu County Democrats, not of the Oahu County Committee. So when you write things, from the convention, you have to make it clear if you're a convention committee of the Oahu County Democrats, not of the Oahu County Committee. The notice shall contain invitation to contact the respective committee's presiding officer or their designee for copies of documents, because as you go along, you may have new versions of documents, and people who are going to be attending should have a right to see that stuff. Quorum. In other words, quorum is the minimum number of people you have to have a valid meeting, right? That's standard definition. A quorum of the rules, resolutions, and platform committees shall be a majority, and that's standard in Roberts, right, of the number of appointed committee members, right? That's, in other words, one more than half of the number of appointed members. No voting can take place at a meeting without quorum. So you got to get your quorum there, right? And it's another reason why I've always discouraged having large committees, because the larger the committee, the more likely you're not going to get quorum. And then, that's a bad thing. And so when a quorum of the appointed committee members is established, the presiding officer or designate will announce the names of all members, voting members, committee members, and guests in attendance, both those attending by video or by telephone. Okay. Powers of the committee. Okay. Convention, resolutions, platform, and rules committee shall have the power to format, edit, combine resolutions of similar substance, and make substantive amendments that do not alter the intent of the amendments to the platform and rules and resolving clauses or resolutions that are being submitted, right? But you don't have to, if there's 4 submissions that come in, or resolutions that all are dealing with the same subject, you don't have to take them up one at a time as separate resolutions. The committee can, merge them together as much as possible. And to participate. Often this phrase requesting the floor is referring to participation, meaning that whoever is there is asking for permission from the presiding officer to be recognized to speak on a given question which is before the assembly. Robert's rule says, and this would be our default, you don't get recognized to speak unless there's a motion pending or you're about to make one. And then you can only do that. All right. So you cannot have discussion loose or commentary loose. And I particularly discourage anybody from recognizing somebody who says, I wish to be recognized as a point of personal privilege. And then they, if you recognize such a person, they will run away with your meeting. And there will be no limit on how long they can talk. And it really is improper to do that, to recognize them or for them to have that right. There is no such thing in Roberts as point of personal privilege anyway. All right. So to be recognized, it is presumed there is either a motion pending or, the person is seeking recognition to make a motion. And then they can only do that. And then after that, debate ensues. Okay. So to do this, the member can use the raise hand. So you have to tell people about the raise hand business. And that's another good reason why they should be on a regular, whatever it is. It could be even, I think iPads now have access to the different devices such as raise hand or what they call in Zoom reactions. Okay. And then they can't begin talking just because they've raised their hand. The chair has to recognize them. Theoretically, there could be 3 or 4 people raising their hands simultaneously, and it is the chair's power, the presiding officer's power, to decide, which person will be recognized to speak, and and that's what you should do, right? So, and then after being recognized by the presiding officer, they can unmute. Before that, everybody is supposed to remain muted until recognized to speak, right? And they have to speak clearly, state their name, real name, delegate status, and district. For example, John Doe, delegate, District 26. Right? And if they just start talking, then as presiding officer, you need to interrupt and say, name and district, please, and delegate status. Are you a delegate? Okay, but you should probably know if it's a voting member, then that should be settled already. Any voting member who has technical difficulties, now you can use the chat box. But we're going to see the chat box is limited and should be limited because the chat box, people can go nuts on the chat box and write all kinds of things in there that simply don't belong and could be breaches of decorum or certainly dilatory to the purposes of the meeting. So if they have a problem, it's a technical difficulty problem. This should not be the ordinary way you seek recognition. This should be, I can't raise my hand, so thing, right? So, and then hopefully the Zoom assistant will, or administrator will be able to try to overcome that difficulty with them. Motions. The presiding officer may require motions and amendments be submitted in writing using the chat box. Now, this is not to avoid the submission rules and time limits, but there can be motions that come up in a meeting that are not necessarily submissions, right? So that's, you have to deal with that, and that's what the chat box is for, all right? So participation in discussions. A member wishing to make a motion or participate in discussions must first be recognized by the presiding officer. Right? You see why only one person can have that authority. Right? State the name and position and address all remarks to the presiding officer. That's important. Also, under Roberts and certainly under the rules here, that when people speak, they can't speak to each other. They cannot speak to the last speaker even. All right, they have to speak. All any debate, whatever they're going to say, has to be directed and addressed to the presiding officer. Authors of proposals before a committee may speak first for the proposal when recognized, so they have priority, and this is basically going to be true. So if you're dealing with submission for a resolution or anything else, you're going to start taking them up, then you would first ask or make available for her recognition the person who is the author of that. And I know we have a sheet that says this is the maker, and then if it says two makers, then one of them. This doesn't give two people the right to be recognized first. They can decide who would, which of them is going to be speaking. So only one person, according to Roberts, may speak first. So reports. Now, this is real important too. 27.2, which is certainly what we're mainly concerned with today, is what do you have to produce when you're all done with your committee work? And that is a report. And please note, this is not minutes, right? It doesn't, so there are no minutes to be taken by committees, right? And we adhere to that rule in Roberts. Committees do not make minutes, all right? And except for their own internal potential use, right? But they're not going to produce those minutes, if that's the case, for the assembly or for the convention, which is what this is all about. You have to produce one document, even if you met 5 times and considered multiple different submissions, one document will be what you submit, and that's what's called your report, right? And what you have in your report is primarily, you can have a little background about how many times you met, and all these things that are described here, but mostly it's, what are your recommendations? That's all we want to know. That's all the convention needs to know. What are the recommendations of the committee now that you're done with your committee meetings? So that's what a report is under Roberts. There is no motion to adopt a report with the possible exception of the credentials committee. All right. So, and that means that for the committees we're talking about here, platform, rules, etc., then you're going to be producing a report that is going to take the submissions that have been received and decide which one you're recommending to the convention and which ones you're not recommending to the convention. Committees do not adopt any submissions. They recommend, or they do not recommend. And primarily, we're looking at recommending, so that in the committee, it is appropriate, of course, every time a submission there, the assumed motion for discussion is, shall this be recommended? Right? So a motion is not in order under Roberts if it is a motion not to recommend. You don't make negative motions not to do something in Roberts. So if somebody wants to cut something off by saying, as soon as the thing is presented by the submission is presented, if somebody tries to jump up and say, I move we don't recommend this, that motion is not in order. All right. So only motions to recommend would be in order. And it's presumptively every submission, that's what it is. The question, and we say that's the question, shall this be recommended? and then, it'll either be recommended or it won't be recommended. And then it'll go into one pile, part one, if it is, and it'll go into the next one, part two, if it is not. The report must contain all the things that are recommended in one part and all the things that are not recommended in another part. Okay, but these do not include things that are ruled out of order. Right. So appointed members of the committees may speak twice to each question. So this is standard in Roberts, but what's not standard in Roberts is 3-minute limit for speeches. So and that's in keeping with pretty much the way all of our conventions and county and everything else meetings, we have that limit. If you didn't have that limit, then it would be 10 minutes each. And you can imagine how much longer your committee meetings would go, according to Roberts. So it is good that we have limited the duration of any speech to 3 minutes and twice. And that's how that works. The presiding officer may terminate debate on any proposal after 3 speakers in favor of the proposal and 3 speakers opposed to the proposal have discussed the proposal. Now, okay, this, you'll notice, uses the word may. This is not an obligation. This is a may. I think you have to use your discretion as presiding officer. If there's a lot of people who want to say something, I think it would be wise to let it go. But on the other hand, you don't just sit there and sit there and sit there. Or if somebody's trying to be recognized for the 3rd or 4th time, hey, we've had the limited the number of speeches that and as a presiding officer at this point, I have the right to terminate debate and let's get this voted on one way or the other, up or down, right? So, but it's still a may, and you should use discretion. This does not include the initial remarks by the maker of the motion, right? All attendees must mute their microphone after speaking. If they don't do that, you're the presiding officer, you can mute them, and you should know how to do that, or you could have your co-chair have that responsibility. Okay. Participation, again, 2.56. Delegates may have not appointed as members of the committee may speak once. So this is in keeping with our bylaws that allow anybody to speak who attends the meeting, but their priority is after you're dealing with the voting members, right, having exercised their rights. So this was not intended to have 3 voting members speak and then cut off debate. All right, this was, if you see people who are attending specifically because they want to speak, then I encourage you as presiding officers, and remember, it's may, it's not must, stop debate after 3 speeches. That just gives you the authority as needed, all right, but not the requirement. After all committee members and delegates have had their opportunity to speak, any member of the Oahu County Democrats who is not a convention delegate may speak once to each question for no more than 3 minutes per speech. So now instead of twice, once, because they're not voting members. Right? So priority in debate shall be given to voting members of the committee. Since time for the committee meetings may be limited, the committee may adopt further. And here, this is not allowed, but you're given this authority by this rule, right, to limit debate as a committee vote. Right? And when you say limit under Roberts also means extend limits, all right, of debate. So the ideal situation here is you don't want people leaving your committee meetings who felt that they have been obliterated and that they didn't have any right to contribute, because that would then really fly in the face of the bylaws. Now, on the other hand, people have to be nice. Right, so the decorum, which is what Roberts refers to, is orderly, respectful speech is what is permitted, and not diatribes or particularly any insults would definitely violate basic rules of decorum. Okay, it's described in Roberts' Rules of Order as well as in the Oahu County Committee Special and Standing Rules number 24 and 25. Personal attacks, vulgarity, or offensive language can result in loss of debate privileges. Likewise, it is a breach of decorum. So we added this one in for meetings like this to use Zoom comment icons And they should not be used during debate. When people are in debate, the whole idea of decorum is other people are supposed to respectfully listen and give them their chance to speak, all right, and not to interrupt. So it is an interruption if in the chat box people are using it to make snide comments, about somebody who is speaking to a motion, right? And if that happens, it's up to the presiding officer to stop that and let them know this is a breach of decorum under Rule 2.5.9. So no thumbs up and no thumbs down. We don't want instantaneous comment. During debate, people are supposed to be listening and thinking about how they're going to vote if they have the privilege of voting. They should not be trying to sneak in all kinds of, as I say, snide comments that, and commentary, by the way, Roberts does not say anybody has the right to comment. And they don't, right? You have the right to debate, and debate is for or against. It's not, I'd like to comment on this. Every time I hear somebody say that, I prefer the presiding officer immediately interrupt and tell them, sorry, you may speak for, you may speak against, but your commentary, particularly on reports and so forth, is not available, not welcome, not desired, and not productive. Visual decorum is also an issue, which means because, unfortunately, people could do things like this. They could change I've seen this happen, where they change their virtual background. So those aren't really, the books of the correct size. That's a picture that I made my virtual background. I've seen people put some obscene things in their virtual background, all right? And they would activate their virtual background in the form of commentary. Sometimes they were just obscene, and sometimes they were utterly pornographic. So those, you have the right. That's a breach of decorum. It wasn't defined in 1920 by Roberts, but certainly that's the intent. And those breaches of decorum shall be cause for muting, okay, or an immediate disconnection, if that's the only way you can stop them from doing that. They should certainly first be warned, take that down. It's a breach of decorum, and give them a chance, all right? But if they don't do that, then you as chairs have an obligation to maintain decorum for the proceedings. The committee's presiding officer's disconnection of an attendee, because that's a pretty severe thing, throwing somebody out of the meeting, all right, has to be announced and recorded in, although we say the minutes, in this case, that's standard language in Roberts. What we really mean is you're going to have to record this in your committee report. Okay, I should change that language on this, but that's the way, this is I can't change this because this is the language that's in the rules that were adopted. Okay, what do you use the chat box for? The chat box is restricted to voting members and the parliamentarian. It may only be used, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things that you can use the chat box for. And if there's people using it for something else, you have to tell them not to do that. And if they do not abide by your decision, those are all grounds for breach of the rules. All right. So you can present motions for consideration either prior, shortly before, or prior, or after they've been recognized. That would be the purpose of this. All right. Make nominations from the floor when in order. I'm not sure we're going to have any nominations in order from the floor. So there's that. But it's allowed if permitted. So provide a link to a document that the speaker cannot display on the screen. So part of your debate might include that there's the World Health Organization's findings on this. You could add that into the chat box as a URL, as a link, and if people are interested. Provide specific comments if requested by the presiding officer. If requested by the presiding officer. All right. So report technical difficulties of sufficient importance that they need immediate correction, or report if you're leaving the committee meeting. You can report, I'm leaving. I'm not coming back, and so sorry. And again, you have to sort of keep track of this, your scribe, so that you know who's there and so forth. And there's lots of good reasons for that. Okay, from the bylaws. Now, this is superseding document to the rules, all right, and even to Robert's rules. The convention committees shall meet at least 7 days prior to the county convention. These committees shall accept submissions at the convention committee meetings with a 2/3 vote of the commission. These committees shall accept submissions at convention committee meetings with a 2/3 vote of the convention committee members present. Okay, which means the purpose of this is if somebody didn't meet missed the submission deadline, if the committee still wants to consider this submission, it would require 2/3 vote to do so by of the voting members of the committee. All members of the Oahu County Democrats are invited to attend and voice their opinions in the convention committee meetings. That's why those other rules are necessary, because this is the bylaws and they cannot be suspended. Voting, only registered convention delegates who are appointed to the committee shall vote on the issues before the committee. Other delegates may participate in the discussions but shall not vote. Voting in committee meetings will be conducted in Zoom in the following manner and order at the discretion of the presiding officer. So these are the ways you can do voting. The committee presiding officer will ask whether there are any objections. And so one way in Roberts is called unanimous consent, is to ask if there are any objections. All right. And in this case, it just takes one objection, and then you can't consider the motion adopted by unanimous consent. Right. So even one objection. So that'd be your first step. Is, and you can tell, usually debate will give you a clue if there's nobody speaking against it, and then you don't have to sit there and wait forever. You could say, are there any, if there's no further debate, are there any objections? And if there are if you have to say then, after giving an opportunity for objections, then since there are no objections, this will be adopted, this submission or this resolution or whatever else you're dealing with. Okay, so there you go. If there is an objection to the motion, the presiding officer will conduct the vote in the same on the same question and will ask delegates to use the yes/no function in Zoom. And any delegate that wishes to abstain. Now, here's where I disagree with the standing rules. Okay, but Roberts does not allow calling for abstentions. All right. So, but it's in the rules, and I disagree with it and advise against it, but there it is. And the problem is now you have to record abstentions. Okay, so, but under Roberts, abstaining means I don't want to vote. That's what it means. And you do not count an abstention in determining whether the motion. So if there are 15 people there and 13 abstain and one person votes for it and one person votes against it, it's that case it's a tie, so it doesn't get passed. But if 2 people voted for it and one person voted against it, even though only 3 people were voting and all the rest abstained, it would still be adopted. Okay, because you only count votes cast under Robert's rules. So, and Roberts clearly says you shouldn't ask for abstentions, but notwithstanding that, it's in this rule. So, you have to, and then you'll have to record them. So, visual or voice confirmation of delegates is required when delegates cast a vote. So, sometimes we have people who say, "Oh yeah, I'm talking to my friend, and she lost her connection, so she's voting for this." You can't accept that vote. That's unacceptable. Somehow or another, you have to have either a visual or a voice confirmation that this person is voting the way that they're voting. So, if they can't get on Zoom, then they need to make a phone call, and that phone call has to be not to their friend, but to the committee, and they'll have to hear their voice and be sure that that's the person who's voting. Okay? So, and again, they have to identify themselves by district. Each pre-convention committee shall convene at least once between April 13th and the 30th. 2023 via Zoom to consider submissions, to reformat, combine, and or revise submissions, and to adopt a committee report containing its recommendations. Okay, that's sort of a reiteration, but it's specific to the standing rule for the entire convention, not just the committee's rules. And also the standing rule for the convention: submissions not recommended by the delegate convention committee must be included in the report, but shall only be considered at convention after all the recommended proposals have been considered, and only if a 2/3 vote of the delegates approves consideration. And that's a separate vote. That doesn't mean you're voting to, to adopt the submission that was not recommended. That means it would be a preliminary vote on, shall we even bother to consider this thing? Right? And such a vote requires a 2/3 majority in order to do this, and it's not debatable. So there'll be a preliminary vote, not debatable, to decide whether we're going to even consider this not recommended submission. And then if it meets that, then you start and treat it and go into the debate and the merits, and et cetera, et cetera. All right. But that's that. Committee reports 2.7.1. The scribe of each committee will provide a copy of their report to the Oahu County Democrats webmaster, me, no later than 6 days before the convention. Such report shall be published on the website at least 5 calendar days. So I got 1 day to put this up. So I'd appreciate getting it in as much in advance as possible, but there it is. There shall be no minority reports. Now, Roberts has a provision for minority reports, but your rules say no minority reports. So that's that as applicable. The reports will include the proposed changes to the Oahu County Democrat platform, the Oahu County Democrat bylaws, and proposed resolutions, according to which committee it was. Reports will consist of the following information. And so again, this is was mentioned earlier as a reiteration. You have to have 2 parts: the things that are recommended and those things that are not recommended, but not the things that were ruled out of order. 2.7.2. That's probably the most crucial thing. And if you need help writing a committee report, and you get stuck with questions, that's why I'm here, and I'll try to help you with that. So I actually, in this thing, I pulled up a couple of old committee reports from previous years to give you an idea, all right, of what they look like, all right, and there you are. So in some cases, you'll actually have the list of all the committee members, and that's always a good idea, particularly near the end. Okay, committee members and so forth at the very end. That could be at the end. And if you met more than once, you can indicate that we met more than once. But look what the balance of this is. It's on the recommendations. The guts of your committee report is on your recommendations. These other things are, FYIs, and it's nice to know, but that's it. Here's another one from a resolutions committee. And I don't have the whole report here, but it goes through those that are recommended. And then that would be part of the report, not just the titles. Okay, so this would have an additional 13 pages of the ones that were recommended, followed by another 2 pages of the ones that were not recommended. And that would be in the committee report that we post so that people can see what's going on here. And ideally, this will facilitate adoption, because these will be presented, the recommendations are usually presented in gross, and meaning that the chair of the committee, it will move, that all of the recommended resolutions, 1 through 13 in this case, be adopted or by the convention, and then you don't deal with the not recommended ones. Remember what the rule is on that. After you've gotten through dealing with the recommended ones, time permitting and all that other stuff, somebody could move to for consideration of this not recommended resolution, and that would require a 2/3 vote to even consider it. But you got to deal with the recommended ones first. There is a provision for separation, which means if you are a delegate, one of those is bothering you, or you want to amend it, then you can move to separate, and you should have these, they're posted. So hopefully we'll get all that information, not on the day of convention, and there's a rule about that, but and then we'll take up the ones for which separation is demanded. And if in addition to, you can separate just so that you can vote it, speak against it. Do not separate, as we'll tell people, if you want to speak for it. And that's all. That is wasting the time of the convention. Sorry. And I know a couple of people who think that's a cool idea, but it's not. Right. So nevertheless, if you want to separate, particularly, for instance, because you don't agree with one of these, you would move to separate. And that form has to be submitted in advance. If you want to separate and amend, then you need to put in the amendment form as well. I think we've got a new separation form that allows for amendment to be incorporated in the separation request if you have a suggestion for amendment, or if you're proposing an amendment. Okay, here's one for, try to pull a couple different types here. Okay, report of the Committee on Platform. So again, you see the way these things work. And platform and bylaws, you're going to see we want you to use Ramsey-Year format so that it's clear what is being proposed for change, whether it's being proposed to be struck out or it's being proposed to insert or add. And that's why it's important. I like the idea of red, but I don't usually recommend it being a requirement, because a lot of people, when they print their documents, it's going to be on a black and white printer. And so it shouldn't rely on that you have to have a colored printer. Okay, so there you go. And what is Ramsey-Year format? If you're not familiar, it's just the legislature uses this. I'm at the university now, and they're proposing a policy change for one of the board's policies, and it was submitted to show the faculty and to get consultation from the different senates in Ramsey-Year format. This is standard, right? If you don't know it, learn it. Because pretty much, and it's even described in Roberts, although they don't use the term Ramsey-Year so much. Okay, so it's in Roberts, described more or less in section 51, paragraph 22. So this is the stuff on its history. So this is called Ramsey-Year after a man named Christian William Ramsey-Year, who proposed it, long ago. And it's just good formatting. It's been used certainly in our legislature for many, many years. Originally, it was you put the things that you want to propose to be struck out in brackets. Okay, and the things that you want to insert or add are underlined. Okay, so today, a lot of people, because of the easy access to a Word program, will, in addition to putting it in brackets, do a strikeout to make it clear. Fine. Okay. Main thing is you don't just submit something, and if somebody who has put a submission in ignores this and just puts in, this is the way I want the new plank or the resolution to read, or, so those kinds of things, then the committee needs to really quickly get back to them and say, resubmit using Ramsey-Year format if you're proposing a change in the previously adopted document. Okay, so for bylaw amendments, this is the recommended way in Robert's rules that you do bylaw amendments. It can be just flat out Ramsey-Year. There's no, so this is just a sample, and it's I think it's a good procedure to use. There are a number of groups that actually specify this, but it wouldn't hurt, depending upon how complicated the bylaw amendment is, right? But the idea of dividing it into columns and rows, and having one of the columns be the current version, the second one being what you're proposing for amendment in Ramsey-Year, right? You see there, this time it's both bracketed and struck, right? Strike out, and then the inserted part is there also. Okay, so, and then finally, which I really consider to be two columns would be enough for me, but a lot of people will put in a third column, which is, okay, so if we adopt this amendment, this is what it will look like, to clean it up a little bit. But they're clearly marked. And then you want to have rationale. Why are you proposing this particular, what's the deal here, all right? So, but this is to make sure that people fully understand what the proposal is. And it's a good plan to be used whenever you're dealing with rescinding or or amending, particularly amending a document that has previously been adopted, like bylaws or platform planks. So email submissions under Rule 5 here should include the following. So you have type of document. Again, the presiding officer, the co-chairs can, when they get these things, if there's a problem, you need to get back to the maker to straighten it out so that they follow this requirement in the rules, right? All submissions for proposed resolutions, platform planks, and rules are due, and they have a due date here of April 12th. So you really can't get too deep into committee meetings until you get them. So you get the submissions, obviously. So there you are. And so this is really good. And the rules, the place where they get sent, this is from, again, the same section 5 of the basic rules, not just the committee rules. You have a special email set up here for platform resolutions and rules, and this is to be used. The original version had a different email, and that turned out to be impractical and could not be set up. So this is a correction to what we saw there, and it's clerical correction. So, but if you have an earlier version that you downloaded and it doesn't have these, or if anybody else does, they need to be immediately advised if they get an email saying, hey, it's not going through. Okay, double check to make sure they sent it to the correct email. Okay, then what do we have here? C, all right, the resolutions committee. Now, resolutions committee, again, there's some specific rules about this, dealing with how they're submitted and who has the right to submit them. Right. And basically, a lot of people have the right to submit them, but there is a criteria and priority for their consideration. So this is listed in the rules here. Those resolutions submitted by elected officials who are Democrats, okay, those that are aligned with the Oahu County Committee's 5 legislative priorities, affordable housing, public education, healthcare, climate change, and economic inequality. Right, and so forth. And so there you go. All right. And of course, as the top thing says, remember, this is an odd numbered year. So national or things that you're trying to change about the state at large are not going to be in order. What we're looking at here are resolutions that relate specifically and exclusively to Oahu County issues and the work of the Oahu County Committee and its committees. So, okay, in the next run, next year in 2024, it will be a state convention year. And then we'll have a limitation against this and focusing on statewide issues and national, international, because those things will presumptively be forwarded to the state committees if adopted by the county committee. So there you go, okay. But, in this year's resolutions, a resolution thanking a person or organization or that's usually called a courtesy resolution, but it could also be a memorial resolution. And they have a lot more slack in terms of, particularly in terms of submission date, and maybe taken in even if they're long past the submission date, even if it's like the day or two before, because we want to make sure if somebody who we should honor with a memorial resolution, that the convention is not prevented. And mostly they are designed to be as non-controversial as humanly possible, courtesy resolutions, right? So, but they have that extra, I think, leeway for submission. Right? All right. Submissions must be supported by another member. So you need a second, right? Which must be verified by separate email to the respective committee. If somebody submits a resolution or whatever, and it's just them, then as presiding officers, you do a review and you say, hey, we don't have a second. So, rule, was this 5 or whatever, D has to requires that you have a second. So get a second and have them write to us about this to indicate that they're seconding your submission. Submissions not recommended, again, I've said this before, will be in your report, but they can only be considered at convention if there's a 2/3 vote to take up or to consider it before. right? And no floor submissions will be considered on the day of the e-convention. And there's the exception, except for courtesy resolutions, and that's at the discretion of the chair. Separate consideration of resolutions, platform planks, and bylaw amendments. So the separate consideration has to do with after your report has been posted, right? And we're now moving into convention mode. So this is where I said before, in that recommendation, I gave the example, there were 13 recommended resolutions. If somebody wants, because they'll be offered in gross, if somebody wants to take one out of the pack and deal with it separately, either to amend or to speak against, then they can follow this part, Rule 8, that they can ask for separate consideration to do this. But remember, look at this. This is something you don't do from the floor on the day of convention, right? This is something that we expect to be done 24 hours prior to the E. So, delegates have a responsibility to figure out what's going on in convention, to read the committee reports well in advance, and not to just wake up one day and say, oh my God, it's convention. I think I'll just sign on, and then, anything I don't like, I'm going to try to intervene on. These are there for a purpose, right? And I really believe it's a good plan, and it encourages people to be prepared and to think about what they want to accomplish rather than waiting for the last minute. So separate consideration. And again, this will actually, according to the rule, come to me, all right, that form. And I have to try to put them all together for a script that will be necessary. Now, you don't have to worry as committee chairs about the separate considerations, all right? That's something for the chair of the county committee, Lorna, to worry about in her script. So all you do is say, as in that last example, these are the recommendations, and these are the ones that are not recommended. I move adoption in gross of all the recommended resolutions by the committee, and then you're done, right? So at that point, Lorna will say, restate the motion. Okay, it is moved by the committee to adopt the 13 resolutions, for instance, in their report, right? And then Lorna will say, we have requests for separation for the following resolutions, boom, boom, boom. And then, so therefore the motion will be, or the question will be, to adopt in gross all the rest, right? And get that all done and pushed away. And then you go to the ones for which separate consideration. So as you can see, this is an issue that Lorna will have to worry about as presiding officer for the convention, and not you. You don't have to include separation requests in your committee report. So would look like that, okay, to amend a resolution. Now, I put in also, you're going to see an amendment form, because during your committee time period, somebody may be in the committee deliberations wanting to see an amendment. And you don't need to do a separation form. A separation form would only be if there's already a motion to adopt in gross, right? Which there's not going to be in your convention committee meetings. So the correct form would be the standard amendment form, and I'll show you that in just a minute or two. So, but this is how you would basically have this phrase: to amend resolution, for instance, number 1, by adding or inserting. Okay, the 3 ways you can amend something are to strike out, okay, to add or insert. And you'll see this in that in brief book, okay, or a combination thereof, right? So they need to make that clear. And such amendments, even in your committees, you have the right to want these and have them in writing so that people can look at them. All right. And for instance, if a proposal for an amendment is introduced on your first committee meeting, you might want to say, let's, because we just got this, we will circulate this proposal, and we'll take it up at the next committee meeting. Which is usually only going to be a few days away, right? So again, people will know what's coming up, and you don't want to be surprising people and making a way that they don't have a chance to think through, right? So let them think through and make sure that they use a form and put it in writing, and not the worst thing I've seen in conventions. And I still remember when the Democratic state convention allowed this, was people would get up and go to the microphone, even in convention, and say, well, I would like to amend this so that this and that and this and that. And I'm going, the chair has the right, actually, even at that point, even in convention, to say, we're not going to accept wordsmithing on the floor. If you have an amendment, write it down, submit it in writing, because the chair has to repeat this. And if somebody is being really, all over the board on this and being ambiguous about the way that they try to present a floor amendment, it does not make for good decision making on this. And then there'll always be an argument. Wait a minute, but that's not what I said. You don't want to be spending time on this. So, and again, you see in Roberts, I put there the specific citation in Roberts, this is in keeping with that the chair, either on his own initiative or at the secretary's request, can require any main motion, amendment, or instructions to a committee to be in writing before the chair states the question. Even to this day, there's a little bit of sexism in Roberts, and he says, "I'm sorry, but I'm just going to say he." But we don't have to do that. So use the forms provided. This is a copy of or a screen capture of what that separation form. But remember, that's for convention, that separation form, not for your committees. Right. However, your committees could use the amendment form. Right. If somebody during the committee meetings wants to propose an amendment to something that's been submitted, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So yeah. To a certain extent, that will be possible, but you have to also follow the basic procedure here that or consideration that a submission, you try not to change too much the content of what the submission is. But like I say, there could be specifics that you want to make a change on. If there's a reference to a body, for instance, I move that the State Department of Silly Toys and Walks do this, when there is no such State Department. So an amendment to strike that out would certainly be something that the committee might want to take up. So you have the option, if you having difficulty understanding what somebody's amendment is, to tell them, here, put it in writing, use this form. It'll be smart, and try to use the Ramsier format so that everybody knows what you're proposing. Okay, that's the quick and dirty conclusion of my suggestions and help and guidance for committee chairs and co-chairs. If you have any questions, the floor is open. Please unmute and ask your question.
Dr. Puette, it's Melissa. I have a question.
Sure.
I know I can figure this out, but I just thought you might hit the highlights, because in my experience, there are often motions made that contain multiple things. And a second is made, discussion happens, and then people start wanting to amend the motion or take the parts separately. So could you just walk us through how that works?
Yeah, so when Roberts has a provision, I hope this doesn't happen too much in committee meetings, because you're supposed to be really focusing on a submission as submitted, all right? But if they give you, that's another reason why Roberts says things have to be in writing, so you can look at this. Now, after it's in writing and people look at this and see, say, 3 things that are contained in the motion that they're making, it's appropriate to have a motion. It's called an incidental motion, to divide the question, all right, and take them up, in separate issues as much as possible. So if there's 3 parts to what they're proposing, you could have a motion which is not debatable. Shall we consider these 3 things separately, all right? Or shall we divide the question? And in Roberts, then, if that motion is adopted without debate, right, then you do that. You take them up one as if they were 3 motions, in the order that they were made usually. So let's look at the first one and just deal with that. All right. So the example I usually use when I'm teaching a class is if there's a motion to buy the president a new car and provide him with a gas card, then, right, people could say, I think we should consider these as two separate motions, because whether we buy him a car or not buy him a car, the gas card issue is a separate issue. So, without getting into any more than that as a preface to the motion, shall we consider these as two separate motions? And the group can, by a majority vote of those that are present in a meeting with quorum, can decide we're going to take these up as two separate questions. And so first question is buy the car or not buy a car. And then that could be subject to amendment itself, such as instead of a new car, used car. So that could not be made a separate question, right? Because it's integral to buying the car or not buying a car, or changing car to bicycle or something like that. But the gas card, that's a separate issue. So after you decide whether you're going to buy the first motion, you're going to get them a car of any sort, and let's say that that fails, you could still consider getting a gas card, and to assist the presiding officer, and there you go. So you can do that. It's called an incidental motion. It separates the single motion into multiple motions that you take up one at a time. And that's assuming that they are not so thoroughly interrelated that you can't deal with one without doing the other. And so you just have to, the presiding officer can rule on that if that's a problem.
So, Dr. Puette, I guess to the flip side of Melissa's question is, I've been participated in deliberative proceedings where there's a motion on the floor, and then there's discussion on that motion, and now all these, interjecting voices are wanting to add to the motion, change the motion. So in the past, when I've presided in different capacities, the ruling that has been, there is a motion presently on the floor, that motion needs to be resolved, and then we can move towards, all these other things.
Yes.
Is that still correct?
Sure. Oh yeah, that's correct. And again, this is why a motion and as well as debate has to be in the, what's the word Roberts uses? Germane.
Mm-hmm.
So if you open a particular question up and it's time for debate, and somebody starts talking about, on the other hand, how come we don't have picnics anymore? So I think I would like to see this amended so that we can, back up the truck. This motion is not about picnics, right? That's a separate issue. And therefore, debate on it, discussion on it, and certainly even a secondary motion on it would not be in order till, as you just said, you deal with the question that's pending. So you have to decide. That's the tough thing about being a presiding officer sometime, is you have to make a call. Is this something that is actually, related? Germane means related to the question that's being considered. And an amendment must be germane to the motion that's being considered. And debate must be germane to the, in the discussion that's on a certain thing. So to suddenly throw up some people call that a red herring, that's, hey, we'll deal with that later. So long, and usually the way you decide this is, if we adopt this motion, would that prevent consideration of what they're thinking about now? And if the answer is no, then it's an independent thing and shouldn't be, this is not a germane amendment. We can adopt or reject this motion, and the other one is still would still be in order, right? So long as they met the submission. And if it's a committee meeting and they're saying, oh, but then I did a submission deadline. Well, then does the group want to, by 2/3 vote, accept this as, or not? That's it would be up to the committee, right? And you could always throw it to them. My suspicion, and that's why this 2/3 is, people really have to want to do that in that committee. In all likelihood, most cases when that comes up, it doesn't make it. What was your excuse for not putting in this thing in a timely manner?
Dr. Kathleen here. In my experience too, when people are making motions, it's an art. And most people don't make very good motions. They tend to wander all over the place. before you get a second, is it possible for the presiding officer then to help that person with their motion? Not saying that you support it or don't, but if you already see that you've got several things going on here, can you say, hold on a second, write it down, or and let's write down your motion and take a look at it. You may have several things you're trying to do here, and we may need to separate the even so you don't even have to get into that multiple motion thing going.
Sure. And that's a very good observation. Actually, I teach a separate workshop for a lot of groups. I'm going to be, I just submitted a description for a workshop I'm going to be doing. And I usually refer to this as framing a motion, framing. And Roberts uses that term in the main book, framing the motion. And the point you made is exactly the point. It's almost verbatim from what Robert says. You know, once a group adopts a resolution or something, it becomes the official policy. So you want to make sure it's written, you know, unambiguously, clearly. And the most common thing I see where I've had people that the presiding officer will advise them to why don't we have a short recess, or we'll come back to this and I'll ask, you know, this person or that person who knows how to do this to consult with you and bring back you know, another version of this, because it's embarrassing to a group if you discuss and adopt a resolution that is badly worded. Right? Yeah. It makes the group look dumb. To say the short in the short line. I actually have a handout on how to do this. And if you're interested, that's okay. I'll share it and with you. I'll send it to Lorna, and she can send it to you folks also. But framing motions, and it includes issues of resolutions. That's why in resolutions we have specific guidelines, you know, and that deal with framing, such as, you know, a main motion always begins with the words either I move that or resolve that. And then the next thing comes is the name of the group. All right. So I started doing this because I work with labor unions. And there was a couple times where a union got audited because they adopted a motion that started with I move that we do this. And so, you know, auditors, they're pretty precise about what you mean we. All right. And that can be a problem if you have committees and subcommittees, and then the maker itself might be the only one responsible for doing it, if that's, or the maker and the second. And so, yeah, it's really important that resolutions and that all motions be written carefully so that there's no question about who is being expected to do what, and also that you don't use a lot of ambiguities, such as I think we should do something like, you know, make it better for everybody. That's my motion. You know, oh God, no. You know, so step back, figure out what your, you know, the specific suggestion you have, and let's, you know, then you come back with a better written motion. And so, and you can do this, unlike what I just suggested, without necessarily insulting them, you know, but would say this would be easier for people to consider and discuss if we have more or it's more precise or more specific and blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to give you an opportunity now. And sometimes that's been done in a meeting as a recess, depending upon where you are and what else is new business is still up there. Sometimes it's just, you know, come back. But catch that's a really good thing. A good chair should be able to catch stuff like that. And it's for the good of the order that you do.
Yeah. I have another question. So when it comes to submitting resos, platform planks, all that stuff by the deadline, anybody in the party can do that, correct? They just fill out the 5
so you follow that rule.
Yeah.
You follow that rule, but it still has to be supported by a second.
Okay, even the platform planks have to be supported by a second. Okay.
Correct.
So we need, then it's our obligation as co-chairs then to ensure that that second has truly seconded. So we'll need to reach out.
So when you get submissions, if they're not properly seconded, you should immediately get in touch with the maker and say, okay, we've received your submission. Make sure that you have somebody who is seconding this, and follow the rule. You cite the rule, and this is what they have to do. Separate email.
Okay, so somebody in a separate email who seconds it needs to say, I am seconding this on behalf of so-and-so in this platform
Yeah.
and blah, blah, blah. Okay,
This particular submission, I endorse and second.
okay. And then Lorna, the emails, I saw that they've changed. Thank you. So are those going to go to the committee co-chairs?
Yes, with the
Okay.
passwords.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
More than welcome.
I have two quick, hopefully quick questions, Dr. Puette. So one is, like in the case of the resolutions committee, if we receive, resolutions that are duplicative or, pretty much very similar and, opt to merge them, I mean, after they've been submitted to the committee, do we need, I obviously in good practice, you would consult with the authors first, say, hey, these are similar, we're wanting to merge them. But do we need their consent to merge them? Or if it's the committee chair's decision that because these are duplicative, we're gonna put them
It's the
together?
power of the committee. It says,
Okay.
the language is, it's the power of the committee.
Okay.
If there's an objection at the committee to merging these things, but, in most cases, you're just trying to say, look, why would we have two separate motions? And state happens even more so because like when there's almost every time there's each county and several different caucuses will do a minimum wage resolution. And trying to deal with them one at a time, figure out how they're different, so that's why that power was, I think, originally conceived as being an authority or a power of the committee to make such a merger, right? So, but you're right, it's best practice to consult with them and say.
Okay. So like if we were to receive them and, we consult with them and then we come up with a draft and that gets presented to the committee to vote on.
Yeah.
Okay.
And remember, they say, yeah, but my submission has this cool whereas clause, and, you're also having to deal with sometimes not being able to keep all the whereas clauses from 5 different proposals that otherwise the resolution is the same. That's up to the committee. If the person has a huge objection, well, then they should, when the time comes, they should, after the committee report has been posted, they could submit a proposal to amend that would put what they specifically want back in again.
Okay.
I have one more, a couple of things for these co-chairs regarding Roberts, and that is, I'm sure that these committees will be very, very kind and open and collaborative and work well with our co-chairs. But just in case someone uses these 2 items, point of order and question the ruling of the chair, can you give these folks some easy guidance as to how to deal with that?
Sure. Well, point of order is people unfortunately use, I actually even saw this awful document that went out to one particular group where they said, if you ever want to control a meeting, just keep saying point of order and then you can say whatever you want after that. And so I wrote to the person who put that together and I tried to politely scold them because, a parliamentarian will, makes the first issue on this. Is it well taken or not well taken? When a point of order is raised, all right, then that it's up to the presiding officer to say the point is not well taken or the point is well taken, and then proceed appropriately, subject to appeal. Okay, and so, all right, fine, but it's not a point of order if it does not bring to the attention of the chair a breach of a rule. So what is the rule that's being violated? And you have the right to ask that. Which rule is being violated? You have, and so it might be just something they don't like. And something they don't like that is not involving a rule breach is not a point of order. So you definitely rule that it's not well taken.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Lorna, because that was going to be my second question was, you have people who weaponize points of order and, in different deliberative proceedings, the point of order ceases all debate on whatever's on the floor until that point of order is resolved. And then everybody kind of just gets handicapped. And starts, starts new debate about the point of order. So, I mean, that's helpful to know that.
No debate on a point of order.
Okay.
A point of order is not debatable. It calls for a decision from the presiding officer that it is well taken or that it is not well taken. And then the only way it can come into consideration and debate is if somebody moves to appeal the decision of the chair, and they have to have a second, right? And so Roberts also says there are some issues that are simply the chair gets to say there's no two sides to this issue. There are no two reasonable sides to the particular thing, and therefore your point of order is not in order, or your appeal is not in order. If it's particularly if it's after you've said it's not well taken, and then somebody wants to appeal it, it's not appealable if it's on an issue upon which there can't be two reasonable positions. So we'll have sometimes people, you're right, we'll try to weaponize, and they'll try to, and that's why earlier I said it's not appropriate for somebody to say, I rise to a point of personal privilege, because there's no such thing as a point of personal privilege. I try to convince, I know a couple of organizations that allow that to happen. It happened in a couple of our county conventions. Usually it's at the end, and it's to say thank you to the chair. So, all right. But I don't even like that. And I'll tell you why. Once the rest of the groups see that you will recognize somebody for a point of personal privilege, which is improper in the first place, then they'll think, oh, I like this. And they'll start to apply it incorrectly. That's why, I'm pretty strict about at least advising the chair, don't recognize a point of personal privilege. There is a section called questions of privilege, which may be personal or of the assembly, but even those, they're stated as questions, and the chair rules right away on such questions. So you can't just let somebody, we all probably have examples of this, and I've had a couple of conventions where somebody just got on a high horse at that point and started talking, and there was no shutting them up, because it's not debate, right? So there's no rule to shut them. So they never should have been given recognition based on that, and say, because mostly it's they want to comment about how happy or unhappy they are with with the world and what's happened, and why you are who you are, and why they are, hey, not relevant, not germane, no such thing as a point. There's a point of order, right? And a point of order means what a rule is being breached. So for instance, if you recognize somebody to speak and they've been going on more than 3 minutes, and the rule says 3 minutes, somebody could raise a point of order that this person has spoken more than the 3 minutes required by the rules. And then you can say, that point is well taken. The speaker will please sit down.
Just to kind of add a little something to Brandon's first question, when we do the merging of the of similar thing, do we consider them, let's say it gets merged into one resolution or something, they're all recommended, or do we have to do it in our final report, or if they're not recommended, is it all that, or do we have to separate out that in that report?
No,
that
the recommendation, go ahead, I think I get you. The recommendation is at the end, so the last thing you do in your report is decide what you're recommending. And if the recommendation contains, say, a resolution that had, actually been submitted as 2 or 3 resolutions, and the committee, okay, the recommendation is for the resolution that you have already now taken that action and merged. You're only going to put that. So you're not even going to say that this is not a recommended, it lists that on the list of recommended resolutions, because you merged them. Now, why do you not need to do this as something that's not recommended? Because people have the right, to be able to separate out and then try to reestablish something that's missing from the thing that you merged as an amendment, a separation with amendment. Right? So, that's up to the body to decide whether or not they're going to permit such a an amendment. And you have a problem with resolutions that the chair may have to intervene on. If somebody wants to amend the resolution that was recommended by adding 4 more whereas clauses. And if you add 4 more whereas clauses, then it's in violation of another rule, right? That it has to be a 1-page resolution. So at that point, the chair, Lorna, would be able to say that amendment is not in order, because if you're going to propose a different whereas clause, you need to take something else out. Can't be put things in, and because the ultimate requirement of our rules is that it's a 1-page resolution.
Another question, just kind of about the recording requirements. Since we're not doing minutes, while the actual operation of our committee, and we need to follow Robert's rules, the motions and all that, from a recording standpoint, none of that actually is really pertinent then, really, right? It's really going to mainly just, did we recommend it, or did we not recommend it? And maybe keeping track of what changes happened, so we
exactly right. So the reason that people will Roberts says, even if you do minutes, it doesn't include debate. It only includes the final stuff. Who
voted for what? It really could just be, was it approved or not approved?
Was it approved or not approved? That's even standard in Roberts for 4 minutes. But Roberts says committee reports just don't do that. The idea, the whole idea of having something done by a committee as opposed to having it done by the full assembly, in this case convention, is to submit the thing to a smaller group of people who have time to brainstorm, right? Brainstorming, like I said before about things from the floor, wordsmithing, that doesn't belong in an ordinary assembly. You're taking too much time, you're wasting time, you're going to have 5-day conventions, right? When there's no need for that. If every decision is made by the convention and you don't have committees, the committee's purpose is to focus, brainstorm, get it concise so that you have something to work with. And then the convention just takes up the recommendations. However, as Robert says about why committees don't have minutes, you can have your own internal notes that you share with each other, but they're not what you bring to the body, right? Only your recommendations are what you bring to the body. So for the purpose of your committee trying to figure out what we did and didn't do, fine, you'll have a recording even, rather than having such an elaborate set of notes. I think it is counterproductive to any group, whether it's a committee or an assembly or a convention, to try to record debate. And this person said that, and that person said this, because that really, I know I've just dealt with another group on this. They say, oh, but it's transparency. No, it's just dumb. Because first of all, I didn't say that, but I said, what you're really doing here is you're making it so people will be reticent about saying what they're thinking. And they could change their thinking in the middle of the meeting. And that's the idea, isn't it? Debate is designed to try to convince people to change their mind. So if you are on record as having said something that later on you went, oh, now I'm really glad somebody else raised this other issue in debate, because now I've changed my mind, I'm going to vote for or against this motion. Why should that process, be, an anchor around someone's neck about what they said during the time period that they were trying to think this thing through, right? You should only be dealing with what the group has decided is our final recommendation. So committees really should stick to just what are our recommendations. And I think it's a good idea that we put in the things that you've decided not to recommend, right? But this is, and the committee should be usually deferred to by the group, because after all, people who just show up at convention, they didn't sit through 3 committee meetings or more, right? Where this thing all got hashed out. So the hashing out shouldn't be a part of the permanent record.
And then that kind of segues good into my final approval of the report. So, I think we all set up 3 meetings. Let's say we're still finalizing things in the 3rd meeting. We finally now voted on everything. So it's going to take us a day to maybe put together the report. we're gonna need to have one more meeting to actually have the committee vote on approving the report.
Yes, yes.
You-
A report can only contain what the committee by majority vote has approved for a recommendation.
So you could call another meeting, and you, all of them have time, you all have time, to call another meeting pretty immediately. You might want to consider having, trying to get through your work in two sessions if you can. And I think I think particularly platform and rules might be able to get their work done in 2 sessions so that they're
And I
very-
guess if we have we could probably have it kind of almost put together. We're going to the third meeting. Maybe by the end of the meeting, just add whatever the last decisions are and vote on
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
that final
Yeah.
report.
Because
And
what
then-
you send to me for posting is a committee report that means that that committee has by majority vote approved this report and these recommendations. By majority, not by unanimous, but by majority vote. But it can't be, just the chair saying, I listened to all you guys said, and here's the committee report, and thank you very much. No.
Okay.
But Dr. Puette, it doesn't need to be necessarily a clean report, right? For example, having okinas and kahakos and proper those, or does it?
Well, we'll have to do that before we post it.
Before you post it, but in terms of
But those kinds of, yeah.
an approved committee
Typos and whatnot.
report,
Yeah.
does it have
Yeah.
to be absolutely, the final?
Well, all right. I know what you're asking and I know what you want me to say. I say, no, it has to be basically the substance, all right? But somebody's going to have to fix it before it goes to
Yes,
convention.
Yes,
And who's that?
yes.
Well, I'm hoping it's not me.
That's right. Okay, and
if
I'd
you
like
give
to
it to
say
me
this.
on
I'd
one
like,
day and I have to post it the next day and I look
Yeah.
at the thing and I go, oh.
yeah. So,
And as chairs, that's something we could take care of as well. So we
Right.
do the vote and we see, oh, shoot, we misspelled
in the
something.
past, chairs, co-chairs, this has all been left to Dr. Puette. And what I'd like to say is that for the last couple of conventions, we've been able to do that kind of real specific cleanup work so that Dr. Puette doesn't need to do it. And I hope that when you get an approval, that yes, you'll get an approval of this, of the actual materials that you need to do, but please take an extra time to do a very, very fine tooth kind of cleanup so that when it goes to Dr. Puette for posting, it is really quite well done.
And you want
And
to,
also, one more thing I'd like to say is that, Michael, you should ask your Zoom administrators to record all of your meetings so that in case you need to look back on something like, what did we really say? That there will be a recording.
yeah. And I should also, I guess I should put this on the thing. The 2 things you want to produce, are a Word version and a PDF. If you only produce the Word version, I'll take it. But if you only give me a PDF, that's problematical for the secretary at the convention if we have to make changes because of amendments that were submitted and so forth. And they'll need to have the Word version of whatever you do. So I will only post online a PDF, right? But for the sake of the secretary or the recorder at the convention, they're going to need to be able to. We put them up, and as little tiny things so far may come up, and or amendments that were submitted, then they'll need to be able to do it on screen, right? And you don't want to have them trying being limited. This has happened in the past, unfortunately, even before we were doing Zoom conventions, where the secretary who said, oh yeah, I'll be secretary, and all I got are the PDFs. How am I going to put this up and make a change? And I said, well, you're not. That's right. You go get the Word files. So please produce the thing in a Word file that can be used. And that's what will be put on the screen during convention.